Greetings, pilots, and welcome to Fly's Flight Academy. My name is Kovakas, otherwise known as Flyteco and Sotor, and today we're going to be continuing on with our Scout breakdowns. Today we're going to be looking at the Spearpoint. This is commonly your rapid deployment ship. It's what its main build is known for. It is the fastest ship in GSF due to its system ability of Tensor Field. When we get there, I'll kind of break down why this ship is mainly associated with that role, and the implications of what the build kind of looks like. Just a preface for that, there is kind of slightly awkward build patterns with this ship that don't quite meld well together. Namely, this ship tends to only have one missile break in the form of your engine ability. So there's kind of that to go into this with. Just fair warning right now, the Spearpoint is just generically kind of a weird ship. Not as strange as the Clarion per se. I would argue to say that the Spearpoint and the Clarion kind of fill the same support-esque roles. The difference being Spearpoint is more notably for directly at the start of a match, and Clarion kind of carries itself all around. So Spearpoint is a little more single direction than Clarion can be. But that's okay, because what the Spearpoint does do is it makes up in a fairly decent all-around package for what it's meant to do. So moving into the components with the primary weapons, I said it before in the Novidai video, I'm not going to be touching on laser cannons. They're just a terrible weapon in my opinion and don't fit in the meta or have fit in any meta to my knowledge. So moving swiftly on, you will notice actually that it does share the exact same weapon loadout as the Novidai, and as such, the same things apply. I will still go over them again here. So light laser cannons, my personal favorite current option for the Novidai and Spearpoint as scouts. It is just a really high base damage floor, really solid all around accuracy. Its rate of fire is pretty solid. It's not too much, but it's not too little. Its power draw is a bit high, but for a scout, it's kind of okay since you're bursty anyways. Its firing arc is not the top of the line, but it's certainly nothing to scoff at. And it really just does have it all. What it doesn't have, though, is armor pen. That's kind of where rapid fire comes in. I'm going to be bunching these together because they're the same weapon. The major difference is light laser is slightly higher damage without armor pen. Rapid fire is slightly less damage with armor pen. There are a few stat differences, like the rapid fire's firing arc is higher, has less power draw, but it has more rate of fire, so it kind of balances out that way. And then light laser, less firing arc, higher power draw, and a lower rate of fire, so its power draw doesn't immediately kind of smack you in the face like that, but it has the higher damage to compensate. As such, on both of these options, you are going to pick improved firing arc and tracking. This is just a really good perk for the scouts to have. You're going to be CQC anyways, and having a higher firing arc means you can fire further off on the sides of your screen. With rapid fire, it even gets real nice and close to the edge, so that's always appreciated. Even with light laser, it's insanely far out there. And you're going to take increased hull damage. This is just because, realistically speaking, even though you're going to have to break through shields, you're going to be doing it fast enough with the base damage of either of these weapons. I mean, 1200 a second and about 1k a second is still pretty solid, so don't worry too much about shield damage. You'll be totally fine. Especially with light lasers, it chews through shields and health, so it's fine. You're going to be totally fair off without the shield damage or any shield penetration for that matter, as none of these weapons actually do that. Of note, please do not run crit on these weapons. They're, of the two, light lasers can run crit better, but that's only on the flash fire. Here it doesn't really do anything, and rapid fire it does nothing for. Its damage is way too low. So moving swiftly on, moving into our secondary weapons. Now, these choices are interesting. You have two really good options, and then one that I personally believe is terrible. So the two that I will talk about are EMP and Thermite. I just want to touch on Ion. This is on a few different ships. It's on the Spearpoint. I believe it might be on the Clarion. I know for sure it's on the Pike. And on all of these ships, it's terrible. And this is because the role that it fills is it clears shields. What you don't need to do with a missile in particular is clear shields. And if you're going to be clearing shields, at the very least, clear it with thermite. That's going to have a dot after the fact that does extra damage to hull. But bursting someone's shield like this is essentially never good. The utility provides is just power drain, which I've kind of gone over it a few times in different videos, but if you're draining someone's power and that power isn't directly related to them dying immediately, like the ion cannons on Starguard, they tear through someone's shield because it does damage and eats their power, then you really are just submitting to a resource battle. And in GSF, in current times, and frankly throughout its history, has not been notoriously won by who has more resources. So you really, really don't need this. And it just has really bad stats. Its lock-on time is really long comparatively. Its range is okay, but not great. And its reload time is an astonishingly high 8 seconds at base. Its firing arc is okay, but overall, I'd say just ignore Ion. It's almost never a good missile. But moving on to its really useful cousin, the EMP missile. This is like an Ion missile, but like a million times better. It does straight hull damage, and it does a nice little EMP burst in a 4,000 meter around its target. And what that pulse will do, it'll disable mines, aka it'll destroy the mines, and it will temporarily destroy drones. So your railgun, missile, and interdiction of the world. It'll do a significant bit of damage, 400 at its tier 4, 369 before that, but it's not really meant for the damage. And it also does half damage to everything around it, so it'll do about 200 to everyone else. And at base, it'll stable systems, but what this is really good for is at tier 5, you're gaining engine suppression. And what that means is people's engine ability is off. And this just means for 10 seconds, you get to chase that person with 0 penalties. And the rest of your team gets to fire their own missiles. Of note, this ship only has 1 missile slot, so it doesn't do the same thing that Pike does. That's kind of where I say this is like the Clarion. It fills the kind of setup role, but not in a way that is super useful. I mean, you can bait an EMP, which is nice, and if you land an EMP, it's nice, but you're kind of sacrificing a pretty significant amount of damage in the next option for utility that your team doesn't really need. If Spearpoint is the one EMPing people, you're kind of one, Spearpoints don't normally live long enough to EMP a lot of people, and 2, it's kind of like the Nova. You're basically a worse Nova Dive. Is what I'm trying to get across. You have a better EMP on Nova Dive that just does more, and the EMP on Spearpoint already has the flaw of it being a missile. So there's that. Regardless, though, tier 4 you're going to pick up increased damage. Tier 5 the engine suppression, and it'll still do you well. I regularly used to use EMB because I ran this as a peer support build, and found out swiftly that that was wrong, and that the next option, thermite torpedoes, is actually, in my opinion, the best option for this ship. My notes are lying to me because it says my personal favorite was EMP, but that has since changed since writing those notes, which was a decent bit ago now. Thermite torpedoes on this ship are incredible. You aren't doing the same thing that Novadive does with thermites. You're not rolling up to someone and just popping an EMP and then getting a free thermite on them. What you're doing on Spearpoint is you are so fast with your system ability that you are able to chase people down even after the engine ability. So you're practically guaranteed to get a thermite off at some point in the fight. And the thermite has so many benefits that synergize with your weapons perfectly. And as of note, light laser cannons on Spearpoint in particular are insane with thermite. Because what thermite does, it does 575 on impact. This isn't straight hull damage, so it'll hit shields. But that's okay, because it'll do another 575 over 15 seconds. That changes later. But it'll do 150% more damage to hull. And with the 15-second duration, this essentially means from the time you hit someone to about 13 seconds in, if you haven't cleared their shields by then, it's okay, because you still have a ton of damage to help you tick over and then execute that person. As well as, for that full 15 seconds, they have 0 damage reduction and 20% of any damage. This applies to your entire team, by the way. That 100% armor pen and 20% shield pen applies to everyone, including yourself, which, since light lasers doesn't have shield pen, or armor pen for that matter, you're getting all that raw damage, penetrating shields, and not having to worry about armor. So you can actually go against bombers with this ship and absolutely murder them. I mean, like, this ship has some insane time to kill against bombers. Realistically, any ship with thermite does, but light laser cannons in particular, in my opinion, are just such a good short range option to deal with anything that adding any extra damage to that is nuts, because it's just going to tear through. It's going to tear through whatever shields even survive, and then it's just going to tear through their hull immediately after. But the shield pen, it's tearing through their hull while it's tearing through their shields, and no armor, so it's good. Of note, it has fairly solid buffs. Percentile reduced lock-on time, which kind of blows, but you can't win everything. Increased ammo capacity to bring it from, I want to say it's 8 to 10. It's in line with the Proton, which makes sense because these are basically the same torpedo, but worked slightly differently. Increased damage at tier 3. This is to just get you a little bit over that threshold. I want to say it pushes you to 600 per thing, giving you a full total like 1200 to shields and 1800 to pull. At tier 4, this is the same thing as Proton. That missile speed used to be for tricking people, but now it's not. So you want to take firing arc so you can track people a lot better. Its firing arc is 16 degrees at base, which is abysmal, and bringing it up to 20 makes it tolerable. Frankly, even 20 degrees is still kind of rough, but at the way you're using these, it's kind of okay. Plus, it has a 10,000 meter max range, so you can really like preemptively launch this at someone and then just fly at them and then engage, because you have a full 15 seconds. But with tier 5, you're grabbing increased duration, so that 15 seconds turns into 18 seconds of just being able to do more damage. I highly don't recommend taking Plasma Warhead. I know the damage increase sounds enticing, but you're still getting damage out of this, and the implications for that extra 3 seconds is 3 seconds of extra shield bleed, the extra shield pen and armor pen. So realistically, you're gaining more than just a little bit of damage. You're gaining a lot compared to just 15%. So increased damage and firing arc are your 2 good choices, and I personally love thermite on this. We're not really running into the ammo issue. I personally have only ever had like 2 games where I lived as the Spearpoint to just run out of ammo, but you kind of supply your own ammo, so it's fine. Realistically, Spearpoint's actually a really good solo ship. It's kind of weird to run it through a full match, and we'll get into that a little bit later, probably like 2 sections later. You'll understand why. Moving on to the systems, and the main reason why this ship is why it is. I'm going to only be talking about Tensor Field here. Once again, just like with the Nova, I have builds for all of these, I'm pretty sure, except maybe Combat Command, just because I don't know. Just kind of a brief overview, though. Targeting telemetry is your single person, essentially, damage ability. So if you want to run the Spearpoint like a flash fire for whatever reason, which actually has some merit because thermite with light laser and targeting telemetry might actually be amazing. There's a sensor beacon build in there. It's significantly worse than most of the builds on here in particular because you're not using Tensor. And Combat Command just kind of sucks, so it's not really on there either. So Tensor Field. This is the primary reason for using this ship. It provides your entire team within a 4,500 meter radius. I believe that increases. Yeah, it increases to 5,000. So once you get to tier 2, within a 5k meter radius, an extra 15% speed and turning rate, which is pretty dang good considering most speed buffs are only like, I want to say, this one doesn't have it. I want to say it's like 10% or something small like that. So 15% is pretty good. Of note, the tensor effect actually does stack, I believe. It's either the tensor effect or like the power regen effect. It's probably the power regen effect because the tensor effect stacking would be insane. So the tier 5 effect stacks, but the base thing doesn't. Additionally, at base, it'll restore a single engine power a second, which isn't terrible. It's definitely not going to keep you to full boost, but at tier 5 that changes. So moving on, I'm actually going to go through all of these because it's pretty important to know how this essentially scales. At tier 1, you get a straight 30-second cooldown reduction, which is nuts. I cannot stress how much you need to get tier 1. Tier 2 is that radius increase, which is actually really good as well. Getting more people more speed is obviously good. Tier 4, you get an extra 4 seconds duration, which is also amazing. You'll notice that every single tier of this ability is massive for its upgrade pass. It's like it scales so well. At tier 4, you're going to be thinking increased turning rate. It's an extra 7% on top of the already 15, so you're getting 22% extra turning rate on top of the turning rate you get from engines. This is where that turning rate just kind of becomes insane. I mean, you can seriously just track anyone with how fast you could whip this ship around. You can also pick evasion, but a 6% evasion buff, if your team's not running like evasion stacking, isn't going to break the bank. It's nice to have, but not as nice as an extra 7% turning rate, which is 22% realistically on this ability. At tier 5, you have an interesting choice. You can increase speed by an additional 15%. But what I found is that actually the engine power restoration, which adds an additional 2 to the already 1 engine power per second, this actually is equivalent to a larger speed buff because the boost is faster than your generic engines. And the way engine speed percentages scale is kind of weird, I've noticed. So while this is 30% speed, and that's really good, it doesn't actually equate to much. Having power regen while you're moving is actually great, especially since this can stack. So if you do have multiple spear points, you can just perma boost to like whatever point you want at the start of a match, or even just go across the map if you really want to. Just why not? But the engine power restoration is really good, especially, and this is why I say this ship can go through an entire match theoretically and in practice. It helps you chase people so hard because the number one thing people usually run into in a chase is they run out of engine and then they're stuck kind of tap boosting to try and gain more speed. But if it's like regenerating for 24 seconds, you're totally fine. You're going to be chasing that person and they're going to run out of engine power and you're just going to have more and you're just going to keep chasing and chasing and chasing for that full 24 seconds. Something else that's amazing with the tensor, in domination in particular, this ship is so good. Number one, at the start of a match, you get your team to the point faster. And number two, during the match, you and a few teammates, because realistically your entire team is not going to rotate, can go to any point you want. As long as you stay slightly grouped up, you tensor, and now you're there. And bringing in reinforcements quickly like that is really, really hard to understate. Or even to equate, I suppose, would be the better term. Because you're kind of like numbers advantage in GSF is really, really powerful. GSF is even though a lot of people run solo, it is very much so a team game mode. It's a lot like ranked in a sense, but in space and with less rewards. And it really does benefit to just have these extra little things to give you like really solid advantages. There are some buffs like that give you minor advantages. Like in my opinion, the comparison here would be tensor field to sensor beacon in the same kind of realm of utility. What tensor does is it lets you rotate faster. What sensor beacon does is it lets you know where your enemy's rotating. The difference in those two things is having your teammates rotate is how much you're going to be fighting with. Seeing where your enemy's rotating with is nice, but you don't quite know how fast and when you're going to be getting help to fight however many people you see on that beacon. And your beacon can be cleared anyways. Tensor beacon is always guaranteed if your team is playing around it slightly correctly. So that is where the ship really shines. You really want to be rotating around the map and using your tensor practically on cooldown, even if it's just on yourself. By you rotating, and when we get to the shield section, this kind of adds on to that. So I'm actually going to take that segue and go into the shield section. And of note, I'm going to only be talking about repair drone here because I'm kind of focusing on this tensor build. Distortion field, though, is still amazing. That doesn't change here. And on the pseudo damage spear point, you're pretty much going to be swapping repair drone for distortion, unless you still prefer to have a repair drone for your own ammo sourcing. But if you have a bomber, you can run the damage build with like thermite and be fine. But repair drone, and this is why I'm saying it's synergized with tensor field. If you tensor to a point and drop a repair probe for your team, well, now they have more health to work with, more ammo to work with, and extra teammates. So the combo of tensor and repair drone is this ship. That is kind of the thing this ship is for, and that's really it. I wrote in my notes that it's a pseudo support. I sugar-coated it for myself. You're really a hard support with this kind of build. The real offensive capability you have is like the thermite light laser, which is a lot, don't get me wrong, but it's counterable with good flying and missile breaks. Tensor field repair drone is way less counterable. The thing that does change here is your skill curve kind of switches to that more of a bomber than of a scout, because the skill curve with repair drone is knowing how to place it, so it actually stays up. And this is harder in TDM than it is in domination, but in domination, it's actually really good practice for you to learn to place your probe on the bottom in the quote unquote like holes of the point. So if you're looking at like the structure of a point, it has the large protruding bits and then tiny little holes in it, essentially. You want to place it either there in the bottom. You can do it on top sometimes, but it's a lot easier to see. And frankly, if your team is fighting above point, that's actually a lot worse than fighting under, because it's more open and it's easier for like gunships and stuff like that to get a lock on you and all that jazz. So realistically, you want to place it on the bottom and have your team fighter on the bottom. That way they're consistently getting the repair drone, they're consistently getting that advantage. You're able to tensor them so they can move around the point faster, and just the whole thing kind of wraps up into a package. For note, repair drone heals for a lot, actually. It's 120 every 3 seconds, so 40 a second, which is pretty good. It doesn't quite out heal Proton, but it leaves it at 10 damage a second, which is pretty good. Of note, the hard counter to heals like this is actually thermite, so it's kind of ironic that you have it in your kit. Of note, at tier 3, the thing that you're going to be picking up, and this is non-negotiable, please only pick this, is refill ammunition. This is 25% ammunition to all allies being killed by the probe every 3 seconds. This is good. This is really, really good. Because if you have that one person who has run out of missiles by playing such a good match, and they suddenly are out of missiles, you can just give them more. It's great. And then they continue on their rampage. Or even if you're on a rampage in the Spearpoint, you can plop it down for yourself. In mid-fight, mind you, Combat Repair Probe is not actually bad. If you're able to essentially disorient someone by placing it behind them as you fly through them, they're going to attempt to clear it, and it gives you a little bit more, or you basically give them the ultimatum of clear it or I just heal back to full. And with that, if they do decide to clear it, it's beefy enough to where it still gives you time to just shoot at them, and it's still going to be healing you while they clear it. So realistically, it's better off for them to just fight through it, but most people don't do that. So by using this in combat, you can tend to kind of extend your life a little bit, and by extending your life over and over and over and over again, you can just live through a match. So that's where that survivability comes into play, and the Spearpoint is incredible at that. Of note, this does remove that missile lock from distortion field, so you only have one, and that's your engine. And we're going to get into that engine choice. Realistically speaking, this kind of follows the same suit as Novadive once again. You have two really good options. Well, one amazing option and one that is really good if you're used to it. Snap turn, best in slot for scouts in my opinion, with the exception of on the Flashfire, because the Flashfire has better options, which there really is only one in the game. But snap turn is an exceedingly powerful engine ability. It is the only 180-degree movement that actually keeps you flat into your turn, and it really snaps you around. Like, it is a fast turn, especially when you have tensor on. I have noticed that it seems to increase the speed at which you can snap turn a little bit. It's not too much because it's a locked animation and it kind of forces you into a specific pattern. But it does feel like the tensor speeds it up just a little bit to help you get out of that animation quickly enough. And the way you use this offensively is more or less the same as retro thrusters, but in reverse. So instead of retro thrusting in front of someone, you're going to fly through them and snap turn behind them, so that way you're just facing them again. And this is actually, in my opinion, better than retro thrusters in that sense, because you're now fighting an enemy that is running away from you rather than an enemy that's still shooting at you in a joust, which one of those is significantly easier to win. So snap turn really just is a solid option. At tier 3, you're going to pick up increased turning rate. This synergizes so much better on the Spearpoint than any other ship. But again, it's still just good for generic tracking and still just the best option for engine abilities. Your second option is Power Dive. And I'm not going to go over my full rant again. Needless to say, I don't quite like Power Dive myself. It's just a really jerky motion and has gotten me killed way more times than I care to admit. But if you can get used to it, it is incredibly powerful. I've seen people use it to great success, and I just can't. So if you can, you'll find good use in it. It provides with decent speed and actually a decent chunk of maneuverability if you can get past the sort of strange orientation it leaves you in after the turn. At tier 3, you're still going to be taking increased turning rate, and that is pretty much it for the Spearpoint. I was able to keep this one a bit shorter because realistically, the Spearpoint is a Nova Dive, but support oriented. There sincerely are so few differences in these two ships that it's kind of amazing. If you look at it, I mean, they pretty much run the same engine package. This is wrong because of the last video. Oh wait, this is my Spearpoint. So yeah, they run the same engine package, same primary weapons. If the Spearpoint had rocket pods, it'd run rocket pods because they're just better. And the only two things that change are shields and systems, but realistically, that's because That's what the two ships do. Their shields or their systems really define these two ships. And that's okay. Having ships have a good identity is actually really nice. Because what this does is it lets you learn the ship for what it is. And once you've learned that, and once you've learned the ship for what it's best at, you can get away with some of the weirder builds, like the targeting telemetry, like the combat command, and if you're really, really crazy, the sensor beacon build, which I personally think is hilarious because it's the repair. If you combo this with repair probe on a point, it is actually hilarious because sensor beacon. I'll give you a second to read it, but it actually does a lot of funny things to your enemies, so it's not terrible to drop on a point. But needless to say, Spearpoint is a really good ship. I highly, highly recommend that you actually keep it in your loadout at all times. Actually, at the end of the shield, or at the end, at the end of these ship breakdowns, I'm gonna go over my loadout and how you can personalize it. And spoiler alert, the Spearpoint is in there because it's useful all the time. You really can't go wrong with it. If your entire team has spear points, that's fine. Spear point is a totally okay ship. As long as one of them is at least offensive, then that significantly increases your odds of winning. But if you're all running tensors, that's fine too. You're just going to be insanely fast all the time. But that's it for the spear point. I think I will make one notable mention here. Your Copilot ability actually should remain in that supporting orient. And for that, I actually think Wingman is the best option. It's either that or like one of the slicing ones, but committing to a slicing one is kind of hard. And yeah, Wingman is actually just a really solid accuracy buff, and it helps you and it helps your team, and that's kind of what this ship is about. So that's all for the spear point. Up next is the Flashfire, which is the final scout. After that, we're going to be moving on to gunships instead of bombers, because I do believe gunships require a lot more explaining than the bombers. I am going to warn you in advance, the gunship videos are probably going to be really long because there's a lot to talk about with gunships, and you really need to just grasp all their concepts. But up next, Flashfire. I will see you guys in the next video. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the skies.